My name is Karen Weyant, and I live in northern Pennsylvania, probably about 20 minutes from the state border of New York State. And I am a writer and a reader. I write actually mostly gritty, realistic poems and nonfiction. So I think writing about the paranormal is a little bit different for me. I also am a professor at Jamestown Community College in Jamestown, New York.
My name's Jen. I'm originally from the UK in the Northwest, but I live in Copenhagen right now.
My name is Amanda Hellewell-King, and I live in a little town in Ontario in Canada up north. I have 3 children and a wonderful husband and a little doggy right here. And I have just opened my own business for Reiki healing, as well as a little tarot information. And yeah, it's always hard. It's always hard when people ask you about yourself. You never know exactly what information to give, but that's sort of the gist of it for where I am now in my life. And yeah.
I have to say that, as I mentioned before, I tend to write gritty, realistic scenes and stories of my childhood from kind of the Rust Belt of Pennsylvania. But it's only been recently that I've discovered that, I think I've always been interested in the paranormal. As a child, I read horror books, probably ones I wasn't supposed to read, and I've always been interested, but I've always also been interested in the folklore stories of northern Pennsylvania. And then I moved to Jamestown. I lived in Jamestown, New York for about 10 years. And I discovered Lilydale, which of course is very important to the paranormal and the history of paranormal. And I found the history of Lilydale just absolutely fascinating. As for this particular piece, I was actually inspired from my students. I taught a class in urban legends at JCC, Jamestown Community College. And number one, I was fascinated by how much they knew about classic urban legends like Bloody Mary, which is what I talk about in my piece, but also how much they knew about more contemporary urban legends and the paranormal, and how the internet has become a very important part with urban legends and the paranormal, and how much they knew about local folklore about New York State, such as creatures I had never heard of, such as the rake. Okay, so I can't say that the paranormal is the focus of my everyday life or writing, but it's very much an interest of mine.
I think it was 2 things. So when I was a kid, and I don't remember where it started, but I was really obsessed with UFOs, particularly like abduction and contactee cases. I had like all these books, these like old pulp books, and I was just so taken with like the Teen Bonnie Hill story and the Villas Boas, and I would write them out in my notebooks, and I was just really obsessed with that. And then when I was like, I think I was maybe around 10, my mum bought a business in my town, which was an old Tudor hotel. And it was built, the current building was built in 1656. So it was hundreds of years old, and it was this like wonderful, enormous, like black and white building, and it had like all the original features. And so she started working there as the manager, and I lived there for about 5 years, and I had my first jobs there, and I moved about in the rooms, and it was extremely haunted. It felt like almost every day something would happen, and it just kind of became, it just became a part of the daily life living there. Just weird stuff happening, and you'd see full-bodied apparitions all the time. It had quite a lot of poltergeist activity, especially in the kitchen and the cellars, and you know, a lot of people that we worked with were really scared of it. And like my brother, for example, he saw loads of stuff, but he still like explains it away as like, oh, I was tired and I didn't see it, and he just won't accept it. But I loved it. I loved it, and I was just like surrounded by weird all the time. And I think that's probably the two main things that started like a lifelong interest in the unexplained and the paranormal.
It's something that's always been in me. I mean, I think like a lot of people, we have certain experiences that come up in our life that influence how we end up down the road. And that rings very true for me. I had my sort of first spiritual experience with the paranormal when I was quite young. And it was something that just always lingered. And in my later adolescence, I got into a little bit more of the witchcraft. But like a lot of people, there's this taboo sort of mentality with it being, you know, against God, against religion, evil. And so it kind of steered me away for a little bit. And it wasn't until my teen years, later on in my teen years, that I kind of got back into things, learning tarot and sort of being more open to the spiritual world and trying to understand my own experience and what I had been through. And I think just over the last decade, it's just grown more and become more part of my everyday life, to the point where I just can't even picture not being down this path.
Piece is Say Her Name 3 Times, and it does start out with my childhood stories of Bloody Mary, and I'm sure many readers probably recognize the story, where you go to a bathroom mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times and she will appear. And depending on the story, she will do many awful things. Okay, it's almost always awful, but there's also different reasons about why she acts this way. And there's different theories about why this story has lasted so long. So why did I grow up with this story, and my students also grew up with this story? Some of them will tell me that they saw it on Supernatural, the TV show. Others will say, I don't remember. I think my mother told it to me, you know? So it's fascinating to me that it was passed down. But when I started teaching this class, I started also thinking about a local legend in my hometown of Ridgeway, Pennsylvania, about a woman who had a very, it was a real life tragedy, a woman who was killed and her children disappeared. And the case made national headlines, and it was a Lifetime movie, and it was a Joseph Wambaugh book. And I started thinking about the correlations between those types of stories.
So, very broadly speaking, I have written about death and the relation to death in the paranormal. So, when I first saw your call for submissions, it kind of got me thinking. And I thought, how can I, you know, I'm not an investigator, I'm not going out, you know, searching for ghosts and things like that. So I don't have many like these amazing stories, but I thought, how has like my interest in the paranormal like affected my life like in a very real way? And it has, in the way that my fear and my view and acceptance of death and dying and what happens next has changed. And I think that's like solely because of what I read and what I'm interested in. And like I credit it all to like paranormal and like occult literature and stuff. So yeah, that's what I wrote about for volume 2.
Wellington Poorhouse here in Ontario. It's actually a job that my husband had taken on. He did the roof there, and he came home to tell me about this museum and the history behind it, and I had no idea about it. So we went to go explore it one day and learn a lot about it, and it's got so much more history than I ever even knew about. So basically, the Wellington poorhouse was built in the late 1870s, and it was a place for people to come that had no other home, whether it was through disability or circumstance, how they ended up there. And during the time that it was opened, a lot of people died, and whether it was not everyone was able to get cleaned because either families were poor and couldn't move the bodies, or because they had no one else. And so they created this cemetery on the land there. And at first they had put stakes to recognize everyone's names. And over the years, it's come to the elements, and they buried trees in its place and kind of just forgot about this land. And it wasn't until they opened the museum years later that they brought a little more life back into it and started to clean up the area and turned it into a proper cemetery where people visit now. And so you can go and visit it and see the people's names on the plaques, and when they were born and what their cause of death was, and understand more about the history of that place. And I think that just is so important, and why a lot of us get into this is how history affects us, and how much we want to understand who came before us. But I think there's also a small part of us wanting that for ourselves when we pass away. We want to be remembered. We want to be connected with in the same way we want to connect right now. And so that's what the story is kind of about that I wrote, is just sort of that connection between life and death and what we want for ourselves.
I think what I would say and what worked for me is just to read. There is just such a wealth of information and wonderful ideas and weird ideas that just make sense when you read them. And it's kind of there's decades and more of these kinds of ideas, and you don't need to sort of go on one particular path. I mean, if you're sort of interested in the occult or witchcraft or paganism or something, I don't think there's one definite path you have to lead. You kind of need to find what's right for you. But I think one of my favorite things about the paranormal is just the absolute wealth of voices in it, and just finding those voices that speak to you. And it's always jumping into a rabbit hole if you find one author that really speaks to you, and then it just your bank account will suffer because you just buy so many books. But it's just as long as you can keep your curiosity going, and don't think that would ever be a problem when you're sort of researching this stuff. It's never boring. Just listen to what other people have said. Listen to people, I think.
Really like writers who are taking on the historical aspects of the paranormal. I don't have one in mind, but if I ever go to a store and there is a writer, and often it is a woman writer, who is discussing the history of seances, for example, I will pick that book up. And I've read pretty much everything there is to read about the Lilydale and about the Fox sisters, mostly because I'm not interested in about whether they were fake or not fake. I am more interested in how they gained power in a time when women did not have power. And that I find absolutely fascinating. So I would say anybody who looks at the paranormal and historical lens is very interesting to me.
I think going back to the history of witchcraft personally, and seeing what these women went through back then, and now being able to, in this modern world, be a part of that, I think there's so much value to be found in this freedom that we now have to be able to explore and be true to who we are. And whether, like I said, it's paranormal investigating or any sort of path on this world of the occult, we're able to do that now without as much judgment. And as a woman, That is so important, to be able to have the opportunity to do that and be accepted. And this community has been so wonderful for that.
I'm thinking right now, I don't have any big projects in the works. However, I have a number of poems coming out in anthologies. More right now, an anthology about sports, oddly enough, as far away as paranormal as you can get. But I'm also active in a group that I think is really important, and it's the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. And they are, I don't want to say recruiting, that might be the wrong word, but they are always advocating for any writers in Northern Appalachia. Okay, they do a really great job. Right now, their conference is this weekend. I'm really excited about the work that they are doing. And most certainly they will encourage anybody, especially with the folkloric aspect, to write and talk about folklore, especially in Northern Appalachia. So I would like to advocate for them. Again, for me, I do have a Facebook page that I regularly update. I have a website that I don't update as much, and I need to do that. But I hope in the works in the near future to have a book of poetry about growing up in the 80s, in an apocalyptic world in the 80s, because right now we seem to think that everything's coming to an end. In the 80s, it really felt like that too. And a book of essays about loss, just the general theme of loss.
Yeah, the only thing I have really is I have this this Instagram that I started it at the start of the first lockdown, actually at the start of this pandemic. It's the Mystery School Book Club, and it's kind of a way for me to write about all the books I've been reading, and it's a great way to connect with other people. And so yeah, if you can go and have a look and have a like, and we can have a chat about like all the weird stuff that we're reading.
This is where I do most of my writing. Is I have a blog up there, so much of who I am is in my writing, and I try to get out at least one blog a week on there. And then I also have it linked to a YouTube channel where I post videos, and I have an Instagram account, which is all under the same name. It's all under Hellewell-Witch. So basically, I have different areas of what I like to do, and I have so much creative energy that I need to get out, and so I use these platforms in order to do that.